Welcome to Hard Talk. I'm Stephen Sacker. In just 5 months' time, Britain will be out of the European Union. But on what basis? Under whose leadership? And could it yet not happen? Brexit uncertainty is coursing through the veins of British politics, leaving little room for anything else. The governing Conservative Party is deeply divided. So is the Labour opposition. My guest, David Lammy, is a prominent Labour advocate of another referendum on any final Brexit deal. But how would that help Britain move beyond its Brexit breakdown? David Lammy, welcome to Hard Talk.
Thank you.
You've been in the House of Commons for, what, about 18 years. Can you ever remember a time when the atmosphere was more poisonous and politicians' ability to develop a policy on the main issue of the day was more lacking?
No, in short. I mean, this is an extraordinary period in the UK's history. There seems to be little common ground, frankly, between the senior politicians of the day. The country is hopelessly divided, and it is not entirely clear what the way through is, or indeed what the short, medium, or long-term future of Britain is to be. So the next few months will be tumultuous, I'm quite sure about that. There'll be a lot of coming and going, I think, in the political fabric, and we will end up in a place that either sees us exit the European Union or, I think, potentially with a second referendum and a people's vote to determine the way forward.
You talk about the depth of the divisions, and there is no question about the divisions in the ruling Conservative Party, and it's not our job today to go into those. What we need to do is analyse what the Labour Party is doing, and at a time when surely the onus, the obligation on the opposition is to be clear in its Brexit strategy. Clarity is the last thing that the Labour Party has come out with.
I think that's probably fair enough. I mean, the truth is that we had a referendum and it left the Labour Party divided. People in seats like my own in London voting overwhelmingly to remain, and people in seats, particularly in the industrial north, voting to leave. And in that sense, the Labour Party reflected the mood of the country. Now, it's always been my view that people voted for a whole raft of reasons. Britain has been slow, particularly to get wealth from London and the South East, to the seaside towns, to rural parts of the country and to the north. And therefore, in a sense, whilst a lot was sold, this referendum, the Brexit would be the answer to those problems, it's clear now that the promises that were made cannot be delivered, and therefore people are changing their mind. Labour members are changing their mind, and that is why at the Labour Party conference, after a lot of pressure from right across the country, it was decided that absolutely we should have a people's vote in the event that we get no deal.
I want to get to what you call this people's vote, a second referendum. Of course, there has been a people's vote. There was a referendum and your side lost it. But before we get to this argument about whether there should be another one, just a thought about the Labour Party's current position. We've discussed whether it's clear or not. One thing that is clear is that the leadership says if and when Theresa May, over the next few weeks, does finally, after tortuous negotiation, get a deal with the EU 27, we will measure it by 6 tests. Now, on the face of it, that might seem like a reasonable position, but if one delves into those tests, it becomes clear they have been set up in a way that it is absolutely impossible for any deal that Theresa May could conceivably do with the EU 27, impossible for her to meet the conditions in those 6 tests. So Labour, without having the guts, frankly, to say it out loud, is saying any deal that she does, we will reject. Do you think that's responsible?
Well, Steve, I don't recognise what you're saying. Labour have said they want a jobs-first Brexit. Now, my God, if an opposition said, look, we don't want a jobs-first Brexit, I think they'd be barking.
Forgive me, one of those 6 tests is, sorry for the interruption, but this is the key one. Jobs first, probably, it's apple pie, nobody could quibble with that. But one of the 6 tests is, does the deal that she might do, does any deal she will do, deliver the exact same benefits as we currently have as members of the single market and the customs union? That is clearly impossible to meet. If you got a deal that was exactly the same as the single market and the customs union, there would be no point in this entire procedure. The EU would be giving Britain everything, allowing it to leave the club and still enjoy the benefits of the club.
Stephen, the European Union represents £274 billion worth of trade to the United Kingdom. It's 44% of our trading. It is our fundamental EU partner. Of course, the opposition party wants us to have frictionless trade and wants us to remain within the single market and would absolutely negotiate on those terms if we were in the driving seat. Of course, because to do anything other than that is to wreck the British economy, and that is what we are now seeing. We are seeing that those who said that we could have everything and eat it, that Europe needed us more than we needed them, that is turning out not to be the case.
Exactly, but you're still using that
debating that with
yourselves.
those 27 countries.
David Davis and others in the Conservative Party came out with this formulation that we will leave, but we'll have all the benefits we had before. It clearly couldn't be delivered, and yet you're still insisting it must be delivered. It's Alice in Wonderland.
Well, there was a scenario under which if we had gone for the Norway model, the EEA model, where you are a rule taker, but you are very proximate to the single market, more or less we would have got that. And on the government's own assessment of what happens in the British economy, if we'd gone for that, I think GDP would have been hit down by about 1.5%. So on that basis, it's absolutely right that the opposition says remain in the customs union. We need to be in the single market or proximate and close to the single market, and that's the basis on which we would have negotiated. Absolutely right.
You are comfortable with the Labour Party having a position which means it will reject out of hand any deal that Theresa May brings back?
Let me be clear. I voted against Article 50.
Can you just answer the question? It's a very simple and direct question.
I will vote against the deal on any basis, because I think this is madness. I've been absolutely clear of that. And it is my assessment on the basis of what we're seeing now, the tearing up of the Chequers plan, that Labour will vote against the deal.
Right, so you've been clear about that. There's no doubt Labour will vote against any deal.
That's my assessment.
The PM brings back. You're going to split your own party, it's clear, because there are some, may I say, more realistic Labour MPs, I'll just name a couple, Gareth Snell, Caroline Flint, who have said in recent days the Labour Party's position is very dangerous. To quote Gareth Snell, I think the Labour Party has to be very careful that we are not unwittingly becoming the midwife to a no-deal Brexit. That's what he sees in the position you've just laid out.
Theresa May would like to caricature this vote as a vote on any deal she can get or no deal. That is not actually what Parliament's about. Parliament is about delivering for the people. And therefore, if we don't like the deal that she comes back with, and let me just say, I see no prospect of Theresa May getting this deal through the UK Parliament.
That's by the by,
this is important.
But we're talking about the Labour...
It's fundamental.
Well, we're talking about the Labour Party's position and the Labour Party's responsibility.
That's getting it through her own MPs. Our responsibility is to oppose and to stand up for working people. Now,
you are going to make a no-deal Brexit much more likely. That's the truth.
Absolutely not, because what we have said is that we would seek an amendment asking for a people's vote. So why does it make it more likely? It doesn't make it more likely at all.
I don't know if your good friend and colleague Chuka Amuna admitted just yesterday that this notion of a second referendum, what you call a people's vote, does not have majority support or anything like it in the House of Commons. It can't and won't happen.
We're in a situation today where at some point in the next few weeks we will get a deal. In some senses, Stephen, and I say this with all honesty, this is all shadow boxing. When you get the deal or no deal, that is the moment at which all of this will coalesce. And actually, the options for what you do with that deal become important. Now, I've said to you, it's generally the view in Westminster that Theresa May can't get a deal through Parliament. Once that has happened, you're into the prospect of amendments to the bill she has to put forward. And that's where a people's vote is one of the options. Or indeed, there may be further amendments on what she should be going back to Europe to negotiate.
Just a thought. I don't want to spend the entire interview on Brexit, but just a thought on the notion that another referendum could sort out Britain's Brexit mess. I'm not going to quote you all the Brexiteers who think that's preposterous and an absolute breaking of the trust with the British people because of their vote in the first referendum. I'm going to quote you one of the most respected political observers, Lord Hennessy, Peter Hennessy. He says this: if people were asked to think again and come up with a different, quote, right answer this time, it is both immensely patronising and it would convince those in the country who think the system is rigged against them that indeed it is rigged against them by some kind of metropolitan elite. Those are the words of Peter Hennessy.
I don't accept that, and let me explain why. The first thing to say is that we had a referendum in which the people gave the British Prime Minister an instruction to go off and negotiate. It is entirely acceptable, once you have that negotiation come to an end and you have a deal, to ask the British people if they like the deal. You cannot undermine democracy with more democracy. That seems to me to suggest that you should have a general election on day one and live with the same party forever. Every single democratic country in the world. This wasn't a party political election. This was a simple question. Do you want to be in or out of the European Union? And 52% of the British people, given that choice, said out. It's quite plain and simple, and that's democracy. It was an advisory referendum in which the instruction was to the government to go and negotiate. That was the basis of the election. Scotland didn't vote for it.
There was no message about going to negotiate. It was in or out. And the British
London didn't go with it, and substantial tracts of the country. We also know, Stephen, I might say, that there was serious fraud in the Vote Leave campaign. There were lies that were told, and there is real concern that was outside interference.
What would the question be?
What would the question be? Investigated by the Metropolitan Police.
What would the question be in this second referendum of yours?
Do you like the deal that we've got, or would you like to remain within the European Union? That is what we need to put to the people. And let me just say, when the governor of the Bank of England has said that if we get no deal, and there's a real prospect of no deal, that house prices will fall by 35% and the recession in Britain will be deeper than 2008. As night follows day, of course we should ask the people whether they want this.
The problem with your binary choice is that it leaves out all of those people, and there will be millions of them who may not like the deal but want to leave the European Union anyway.
Look, then they're
not to be represented in this vote, aren't they?
Absolutely not, because we live in a democracy, and clearly there will be some in the country that like the deal and want to vote for the deal. But you should seek the consent of the people to a deal that will make the country poorer on any basis. Any basis. I think it's all right and legitimate to ask the people, do they like the deal? If they like the deal, then we go forward. If they don't, then we will remain within the European Union.
Let me change tack a little bit and consider your political life, what you care about, judging from your record over the last 18 years, which I would say are issues of what you see as grave inequality in this country, race issues as well, that is, of racial inequality and discrimination. Today, a report came out from the Equality and Human Rights Commission saying Britain is at risk of becoming a two-speed society with a string of alarming backward steps seen in recent years. I would put it to you that the fixation that you and others have with sort of changing the course of Brexit is diverting so much attention, political time and resource from actually the issues that your career as a whole would suggest you care about most.
On the contrary, Stephen, Parliament has now spent 2 years with only Brexit dominating. If we are to exit the European Union, the legislation in Parliament to deal with the consequences of that will go on for another decade. And you're quite right. We need to fix education. We need to resource the NHS. We've got a huge housing crisis here in London and in much of the country. Fundamental issues that we've got to be getting on and dealing with. I'm afraid actually what we should be doing is getting to the end of this relentless debate on our relationship with Europe and dealing with the profound problems. And I think the best way forward on that is actually a people's vote.
Let's talk about the profound problems as you see them. Do you see Britain's problems primarily, and particularly that your constituents and the people that you work with day by day, do you see that their most profound problems are a result of issues of class or race discrimination?
Well, the two go hand in hand, obviously. I don't like to distinguish between one and the other. The truth is that there are profound inequalities in Britain in an age in which the technological revolution means that there's been a massive loss of jobs in the middle of the economy. Britain has struggled to devolve wealth out of London and the southeast. And on top of that, in an era in which it's all been about immigration, yes, I'm afraid our own figures demonstrate that we've had a 40% rise in hate crime, and there are real entrenched inequalities for black, Asian and minority ethnic people in our country. All of the figures, less employment, doing less well in education, doing less well in housing, and we've got a huge problem in our prison system that David Cameron asked me to look into because of the amount of black and ethnic minorities in our prison. Those are profound problems, but sitting alongside those are problems of economy and wealth that of course affect white working class populations in Britain as well.
Let me ask you a personal question. It seems to me politicians all have their own and distinctive styles. Yours is a very personal style, and it involves the injection of a great deal of passion and at times a great deal of anger into politics. I'm thinking of your response to the tragic fire at Grenfell, the tower block, where more than 70 people lost their lives. I'm thinking also about your reaction to the revelations about the so-called Windrush generation who were wrongfully forced to leave this country, having made their lives here for many, many years. You get angry in public. Do you think that serves your issues well?
Well, I don't describe what I do as angry. It may be passionate, but I've got to say 72 people lost their lives in a fire that could have been prevented. And absolutely, we have to have politicians that will speak truth to power when you look at the faces of those who died. And when you challenge me on Windrush, Britain stopped deporting its own nationals to Australia in 1868. How can it be right when we had a generation of people that arrived here from the Caribbean that gave this country so much that you strip them of their rights? You deport them, you detain them, you deny them access to pensions, to healthcare, and that is not something that should animate and make people furious that this has happened in Britain's name. Of course, and let me just say, these are the descendants of enslaved people that was done by this country. It is horrendous, and of course it has animated me because this included my parents and our generation, but it is part of a rhetoric. And it's a rhetoric around immigration, it's a rhetoric around difference, it's not consistent with a civilised democracy, and we should call it what it is. You do not get to say that you're going to have trade deals with the world and then treat the world's population that arrives here because of your colonial past in such an atrocious way.
Do you believe, looking at politics today, that there is institutional racism in, for example, the Home Office, which of course was the department responsible for the Windrush decisions? Do you believe, when you look at policing in London today, that there is institutional racism?
Racism and discrimination exists in Britain, of course it does. I do believe that the Windrush is an example of systemic discrimination against low-hanging fruit, which was British nationals who ultimately were subjects because of empire, treated as they were because of the colour of their skin. That is my sincere belief. Yes, systemic prejudice and discrimination
How
on
do
behalf of
you
those people.
best use the leverage you have? I'm very mindful of your personal story. You know, as you've just said, you were brought up by a mother who came from Guyana, made a life in North London, lived in poverty. Your father left home. You managed to get a great education, went to one of London's best universities, then to Harvard University as well. You now, having been a barrister, are a politician. You have succeeded in Britain, despite everything that we've just discussed. So how do you leverage what power and influence you've mustered to help others?
Every day of my life. That is why it is so important to me to speak authentically and with power about these subjects. But let me just say...
But going back to where I began, the report from the Equality and Human Rights Commission today saying Britain is seeing an alarming string of backward steps, that it's at risk of becoming a two-speed and two-tier society. That 18 years of yours in politics doesn't seem to have yielded very much.
We're in a paradox. Britain at its best is a country where someone like me can advance and do well. It is a country relative in Europe which feels that it can be fair and that you can get a fair crack of the whip. But yes, there are forces in this country that want to take this country back. There are forces that believe the empire was good and that's why we should reject the European Union and recreate a new imperialism. It doesn't seem to understand Britain's history. And Britain's history is not just a history of winning the war and Hitler and of King Henry and the Henrys. It's a history also of colonialism and empire. There is good and there is bad in that story. And actually modern Britain, face up to that, be robust and honest about that, say we've learnt from that, and actually the opportunity to be a multicultural country at ease with its history and itself is impressive. We saw that at best in 2012 when we won the Olympics and did this amazing ceremony and put on an amazing show for the world. That's Britain at its best. But the summer before, the 2011 riots, was perhaps Britain at its worst. So there's a paradox in this. And absolutely, I want to bend that arc of history towards justice and towards the better facing of ourselves in this country.
Moving words, but let me ask you a final and difficult personal question. You are a prominent black politician in the United Kingdom. You, under Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, were given ministerial posts. Currently, you have no position in the shadow cabinet of the Labour Party. And when you were asked about this recently, you said something which perhaps smacked of personal anger. You said of why you're not in the shadow cabinet, go and ask the white men who run my party. Go and ask them. Don't come to me and ask me. Ask them why they've chosen who they've chosen. Is there still an undercurrent of discrimination even inside your own party?
Of course the Labour Party is not immune to issues of discrimination and prejudice. But that was not what I was indicating. The truth is, I am one of Britain's most prominent politicians and I do it from the backbenches. That's why you've invited me on to this show. I'm hugely privileged and fortunate to have gone to Harvard, to have had ministerial roles. I'm able to do what I do on behalf of the people I represent and others in this country from the backbenches. But in the end, I don't run the Labour Party. Jeremy Corbyn runs the Labour Party. And so if you want to ask why David Lammy isn't in a shadow position, then the question is best directed at him, not at me. But am I comfortable with where I am? Am I able to affect change from where I am? Do I find colleagues in other parties like David Cameron asking me to do a review on our prison system? Yes, I do. So I personally am very fortunate and I believe I'm able to stand up for the people I believe in.
David Lammy, we have to end there, but thank you very much for being on Hard Talk. Thank you.